All right, in today's lesson, we are going to talk about one of my favorite training devices here, and this is the double rope. So I'm sure whether you're watching Rocky, whether you're watching some 24/7 countdown special, you've seen boxers use the slip line. The slip line is a single rope, and if I'm using it just as a single rope, it represents my center line, and I gotta practice getting offline, moving my head, not standing in one place as I either pursue or exit from exchanges. Now, the double rope works differently than this. When I'm using the double rope, this represents my opponent's jab lane and my opponent's cross lane, and is one of the best ways that you can start understanding lane theory so that you can use it and have success when you fight. The double rope is one of the best tools for understanding lane theory because it gives you the 5 lanes in a physical capacity. As I said in the intro, when I'm on the rope, I imagine it represents the jab lane and the cross lane, the center lane, and if this is my opponent's cross lane, then this would be their open lane, and over here would be their closed lane. When I move around in the pocket in an exchange with somebody, I'm trying to weigh the risk and reward of how to attack and how to defend from different positions. And if you understand the rules to follow here as you traverse these different lanes, then all of a sudden you start building a map in your mind of how best to protect yourself and how best to attack your opponent. So this piece of equipment and the drills associated with it help to bridge the gap between your imagination when you're shadowboxing and left kind of floundering, you have to imagine everything, and a real opponent where you're being reactive, all right? And you're actually seeing shots coming and you're actually in positions. When I'm on this, if I imagine that these are my opponent's jab and cross lanes and I'm on the center line here, that means that their head's right here. Even as I move around, when I'm here, I can hit them on the head. If I'm over here, I'm still hitting them on the head. If these things stay constant, that jab lane and that cross lane, then punching like this means I'm punching at nothing. My opponent is over here, their head is in between their jab lane and their cross lane, and I need to always remember that as I move. In a real fight or a real spar, your opponent changes positions with you. This is more static because it allows you to lock these in, these positions in, these attacks in to your muscle memory so that you can pull the trigger on them quickly in a fight. If we're changing positions by changing levels and drop stepping, then it's important to remember the way that we can counter as we change levels, all right? So let's remember the 4 ways to counter off the roll. There's the delay, the Duran, the drag shot, and the Dempsey. So my delay counter has me doing a full beat of defense into my offense with the side of my body that I've loaded up. My Duran counter has me doing a half beat of defense and then standing up and striking with my trailing hand to the center line as I rise up. This can be an uppercut or it can be a straight punch. My Dempsey is that Nike swoosh shape where I rise up with the hook, swing, and I split their arm. And then my drag shot is the only true simultaneous counter where I hit the body as I change levels and then rise back up. These are going to be the 4 counters that I'm going to be using as I traverse this drill, as I move through these lanes. And there are different rules for how I can apply each of them. Let's first talk about the delay. All right, so if we're applying our delay counter to this piece of equipment, then there are 2 rules that are going to kind of govern our punch selection here. The first one is remembering where our imaginary opponent is. Their torso and their head are between the ropes. The second is remembering that old boxing rhyme, if they're looking, you're not hooking, which means I'm not throwing hooks on the line. So that means as I move back and forth on this using my delay counter, as I drop step to my closed side, I can load up my hook high or my hook low. I can't throw a straight punch or an uppercut with this hand because their head's over here. I'd be punching at nothing. As I come back, I can throw a straight punch or an uppercut, loading up my right side. I can throw the 2, or I could have thrown the 6, but I wouldn't throw the 4 because then I'm rising up, I'm standing on line, and I'm throwing a hook. That would let them inside of my defenses and would leave me vulnerable. So as I travel through this, when I'm coming online, straights and uppercuts. When I'm coming offline, hooks to the head or to the body. So if I go back and forth a couple times, step, hook high, step, uppercut, step, hook low, step, cross. That's how I choose and structure my punches as I travel through these different positions if I was only using my delay counter. Our next counter off of a level change is when we attack center line with our trailing hand, and this is the Duran. So I can do this with a straight punch or with an uppercut, but again, I need to think about where my imaginary opponent is positioned. If I'm starting in my opponent's close lane, and then I step over to the center line, I can attack with my rear hand. So my trailing hand comes up and spikes center line. This could be an uppercut, or this could be a straight punch. I'm not hooking on the line, I'm attacking center line with my trailing hand. Now, I can't do this when I come offline, because I need to wedge this punch in between my opponent's guard. So I can't do this, because my imaginary opponent isn't over here. They're here, in between their arm, in between their jab and their cross lane. So I have a lot of people who try to problem solve with this, and instead they cross lanes with this. They go down, and then they leave that uppercut behind as they pop themselves out to their opponent's open lane. The problem with this is that while you can physically do it, you're trading a poorly structured punch that likely isn't going to hit very hard and doesn't create any traffic on your open side, while putting yourself in perfect position to get hit with your opponent's 3. This is usually not something that's worth the risk and the reward. I wouldn't want to step over here and throw this shot, because I'm trading something that's not very powerful while putting myself in a position to get hit very hard by a well-structured shot. So your rule is you only throw the Duran as you come online. Our next counter off of the roll or off of the drop step is going to be our Dempsey roll. So the Dempsey is categorized as a hook with the trailing hand that splits your opponent's arm. Now, I can throw this over my opponent's shoulder, or I can throw it up their center line, depending on which hand they throw at me. So if I imagine that my opponent feeds me their left hand like a jab, I can roll under this shot and rise up, throwing that hook over their shoulder. If you imagine my head and my arm sandwiching their jabbing arm. Or if they throw their right hand, I can do the same thing where my head ends up safely elbow side as my fist comes up and spikes on their center line. As long as I have context for why I'm throwing this in the position that I'm in, I can throw the Dempsey at any time while doing this drill. Now, some athletes will say to me, "Coach, why is it okay that I can throw the Dempsey while crossing lanes, but I can't throw the Duran?" And I would say that this is twofold. The first one being that this is a poorly structured shot, while this is a well-structured shot. And the second being that when my arm is down, like when I'm throwing an uppercut, I don't create traffic to stop the person from hitting me from the far side. But when I'm throwing a hook, I create traffic so they can't hit me with anything while I'm throwing this shot, and this hand will return to my face as I continue to move and continue to be defensive in an exchange. Like and subscribe. Our final counter off of the drop step or the level change is going to be our drag shot, where we attack the body as we roll through the bottom position. Because my head is changing both lanes and levels, and I'm breaking ground with my guard, if I'm doing this correctly, I can throw this at any time. If I'm in my opponent's closed lane and they attack me with the right hand from the far side, I can drop into that hook to the body. If I'm on their center line and they attack me with the right hand, I can drop and throw that hook to the body. It's important to remember that with the first 3 counters here, the delay, the Dempsey, and the Duran, I am landing this punch as my trailing foot lands. With the drag shot, I'm landing this punch with my leading foot, where I land this shot as my foot lands. And that's because this is truly a simultaneous counter. There is no delay here. You hit them as you move and as they would have hit you. So in review, I need to imagine that I have a dangerous opponent right here in front of their jab in their cross lane. And I need to make sure I'm not hooking on the line. So following these tenets as I change lanes here, all right, my delay counter I can throw at any time, but I have to select the appropriate punch as I do so. My Duran I can only throw coming onto the center line. I can't throw it as I step off because I have no traffic and it's a weak punch. I can throw my Dempsey anytime I would like, going to my right, or going to my left, and I can also throw my drag shot anytime I would like, and I want to make sure that punch is landing as my leading foot lands. And this is how you select your punches if you're only focusing on lanes when you're using the double rope. So taking lanes is one way that you can outmaneuver somebody, that you can drill out on the double rope here, but you can also practice taking angles on the double rope. So as we've talked about in previous videos, there's a deep angle that takes 3 beats to get offense off, and you always attack center line. And then there's a shorter angle that only takes 2 beats to get offense off while you attack center line. I can do both of these on here, and the ropes are going to give me guidance on if I ended up in the correct position. So if I'm taking a deep angle, it's going to take me 3 beats to attack center line. Step and sink, rise and reset that foot, and then I have my lead foot where it's supposed to be for me to be able to attack center line. You can attack center line with a 3 low, 3 high, or a 5, but again, notice that for all of those punches, my fist is here, in between my opponent's jab and cross lane, splitting their guard, hitting their center line. This same thing plays out if I'm going to my closed side angle, step and sink, pivot and rise, attack, or attack, or attack. If I find that after I take this angle, I'm not in a position where I can correctly pierce through my opponent's guard and through their center line, then I know that I've made an error and I need to adjust my footwork to accommodate. If you remember from previous videos, I can also take a short angle to attack center line. And once again, these ropes are going to help me make sure that my positioning is correct. So if I'm taking my short angle to my open side, step and sink, pull and attack. I should be able to pierce my opponent's center line with this uppercut, and my alignment should be about 45 degrees to their line of attack. Same thing going over to my closed side short angle, step and sink, pivot and rise. If I can't pierce their center line, then I have made a mistake. Mistake for me to address in this video is just making sure that when you take that first step, it's forward and not out. If you look at my feet, specifically when I take this closed side angle, if I go out with this step, then by the time I pivot, I'm not in a position that I can attack anymore. But if you watch my feet, if I go in with this step as I'm supposed to, then that pivot's going to put me exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even though my head is changing positions, my feet are making a beeline to get to the thing that I'm attacking. saw an interview in the early 2000s with who I think was Shane Mosley, where he said, the sweet science is just every boxer or coach's assessment of what is worth the risk and reward in boxing. And some coaches, they think it's worth hooking on the line. You know, some coaches are going to encourage you to throw Duran when you're in an open or a closed lane. This is a good drill and a good piece of equipment that allows me to reinforce my understanding as an athlete and as a coach of what I think is the safest way to apply the sweet science, to wield boxing as a tool. I've been accused of having kind of a defense first style. I've been accused of being cute as we've traveled around and sparred before. But I think these are important things to keep in mind. You know, if you want to stick around in the sport for a long time, or if you ever want to use your boxing in a Muay Thai or an MMA or a self-defense context, the first thing you should be thinking about is understanding damage. You know, you're not always going to have big cushy gloves and headgear to keep you safe. So you need to take every opportunity you can to mitigate that risk and increase that reward, and be picky and choosy with what you throw and from where you throw it. If you continue to practice this, if you follow the rules that I've laid out with the double rope, then it'll help give you guidance and help make you a high percentage fighter so that you can have success when you fight.
Anthony. All right, rolling.
Do you want to learn to be a gooder boxer than you are bad now? You got the technical, and if you do it enough, then it's better.
I like it, Picasso.